Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be presenting my project, which is an implementation of a thermostat system. So just before we begin, right here is the microcontroller. It's a Teensy 3.1. Then we have a row of LEDs here. The furthest most right LED is a normal indicator. The middle one is a warning indicator, and the left one is a danger indicator, and all those are basically set based on user input values, which we will get to in just a second. Then we have the RS-232 level shifter, which is basically what the computer, which is hosting the Java application, communicates through to the microcontroller, and then a TMP102 temperature sensor for measuring the temperature. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go over here and start the application. So it's a pretty simplistic GUI, and as you can see we already have an error message which basically comes up and says, hey, the host PC hasn't been able to communicate with the microcontroller within 5 seconds. There may be a problem, there may not be. So as we can see, it shows that basically in the error message. So it's saying if the user hasn't turned it on or off hasn't been selected, then basically there could be an error with the power or some additional error. So for now we're going to go ahead and click this off. So on startup with the default settings file that we currently have, the threshold values are set to where the low threshold is 75 and the high threshold is 78. So what's going to happen when the temperature is under the low threshold, that rightmost LED, which is currently lit because of the startup message, should basically be lit. And then anything between those values should light up the middle LED, and then anything above the high threshold should light up the leftmost or the danger LED. So let's go ahead and select the current tab, and what we're going to do is we're going to start measurements. So right now the temperature seems to be holding steady at around 75 or 73, around 73. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to breathe on the sensor to try to get it above the high threshold. So there we go, it went above the 78 once it comes back down. So once it gets below 75, we should see the right LED come on again, showing that the temperature is below the low threshold, as we did right there. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is see a graph. So this is the graph of 1 minute. There's several options from the edit menu. The last 30 seconds, last minute, last hour, last day, last week. So we can go ahead and just go through each of those just to give you an idea of what the different graphs look like. So this is the last hour. Since we've only been running for just over a minute, there's not a whole lot to see yet. And then it further goes for even the day and the week. So to make it easy to see things, we'll go to 30 seconds. So it looks like the temperature is holding pretty steady at around 75 right now. So I'm going to go ahead and try to make it go up again. So we can see the little blip in the graph. It's pretty high right now, so it's above the high threshold value. So once it drops below 78, we should see the warning indicator switch over, which it does. Good. So now let's go ahead and change the high threshold, and let's try to make it a value that's less than the low, which it shouldn't allow. So we'll make it 70. Now what should happen here is when the user hits apply, it should tell you basically, uh-oh, invalid error input value because the high threshold's lower than the low threshold, which isn't allowed. So we're going to go, okay, well, let me try to enter in my name. See what happens. We're going to try to fake it out. get another error that basically says please enter a valid number. Okay, so what we're going to go ahead and do is enter in, let's say, 60, and we'll change the low threshold to high. So when we hit apply here, it'll update the internals to where the danger alarm based on these new values should activate, which it did, because obviously the temperature is above 60. So let's go ahead and put it back to, let's say, 78, and then 75. Let's make it 74 just to be safe. So now it updated to the warning, which is between 74 and 78. So let's just make sure we didn't break anything. Brought it back up. Oh, got it up to 82. Great. Okay. So we're still running. Good. And now it changed. And changed back. So it's kind of going back and forth right now because of the temperature differences in the apartment. So now we're going to go up to and change it to, let's say, 180 for the low. Click apply, and now it goes down to the low. So we're going to go ahead and save off these this XML file, and we'll call it let's say test1. And we'll go over here and click save. Oops, I wanted to save it to the desktop, so let me try that again. Right, test1. And then we get the new file on the desktop. So let's change these values back to 78 and say 70. Click apply. So the warning indicator is now on, so the temperature should be reading between 70 and 78 as it is. The graph's still going. Let's make sure the graph is still updating, which it looks like it is. And we can see the little blip. Alright, so now what we're going to do is go up and we're going to load that previously saved XML file, which I'll bring it up real quick, show you the values. So zoom in on this. So it saved the high threshold as 100 and the low threshold as 80. So when we go to load this, we should see the GUI update as with those values. So let's go ahead and load. We'll go to this test1, and as you can see, GUI updated. And then we get a new error message which comes up every time you load a settings file. You basically have to go back in and start the configuration, or start the system up again. So we'll go ahead and do that. And now under the new settings, we see that the warning, or the normal indicator has switched, which is the proper operation because it is lower than the 80. So let's make sure it's still working. Went above 80, so it activated that warning indicator as it should. Go over to the history and we can see the blips. Okay, so now for the final test, what we want to see is basically what happens when the system loses power. So I'm going to go ahead and unplug the system. And we get an expected pop-up like what happens whenever you first start the system, which basically says, hey, if you've already selected and you're measuring, disregard, but you might have a problem with the power. So Looks like we did have a problem with the power, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK on this one. And then we'll plug it back in and see what happens. So it appears that we're still measuring. One thing that you will notice is the LEDs are off, and that's basically because of the way it's implemented right now is it only changes on an event where the high threshold or low threshold boundaries end up changing. So originally we had 80, so if we can get the temperature back up to 80, it should activate the alarm and start operating as normal once again. And there we go. So that pretty much concludes the demonstration. Until next time, thank you.